Today, we've got a Pokemon that has received a ton of requests, and finally, we're able to deliver. Upon Generation 4's release, Infernape immediately became one of the most popular Pokemon. From its adorable beginnings as Chimchar, the perpetual underdog, to its continuation of carrying on the firefighting torch from its predecessor Blaziken, Infernape established itself as one of the most well-known starter Pokemon. As a Chimchar, I'm sure a lot of fans sympathize with it, since its trainer was Paul, and as we all know, Paul's kind of a dick, so it was pretty cathartic to see it finally evolve under Ash's care. Also, we have no real stats to support this, but we would be willing to bet that most who have played through the Generation 4 games have gone with the Fire Monkey. But as with every Pokemon in this series, we want to know if Infernape burned as brightly as it did in the hearts of fans in the competitive scene. What did it do? Did it do things? How good was Infernape actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. As soon as the generation was released, Infernape immediately became one of the poster children for the new Pokemon that would have an impact on the metagame. Its cousin Blaziken had success in defeating bulky teams in the generation prior, but was let down by its lackluster speed against the more standard and often faster offensive threats, and thus wasn't used much owing to lack of true consistency. Infernape, on the other hand, was one of the Pokemon that set speed tiers with its blazing 108 speed stat. With that stat, it quickly established itself as a premier offensive threat. However, like Blaziken, it also excelled at defeating difficult defensive cores. As a matter of fact, the now household term Mixape, referring to an Infernape that used both sides of the attacking spectrum to defeat the renowned physical and special wall duel Skarmbliss, was one of the go-to Pokemon for defeating stall teams. Mixed sweepers have existed dating back to RBY, but they weren't as truly consistently powerful and therefore not as prominent thanks to the various idiosyncrasies of their generation. Infernape became the definition of the term and was the most prominent example in a generation that became more and more centered around the idea of these Pokemon, thanks to the new physical special split as opposed to the type-centered stylings of previous generations. Other known mixed attackers such as Salamence and Jirachi were followers on the trail that was blazed by Infernape. Now back to Infernape's speed though. This is what separated it from wall breakers that specialize in crushing defensive Pokemon. Infernape was an offense killer too. Apart from Gengar, another prominent DP threat, largely thanks to its ability to both eat Infernape's close combats and outspeed it, and Deoxys speed, Infernape was often the fastest unboosted Pokemon in any given battle, outside of a few, much less viable exceptions. And this was especially huge when Garchomp and its 102 speed was trolling everything in sight, most notably the large pool of base 100s. Now of course, Infernape's stab moves were hardly going to be crushing Garchomp anytime soon, but it augmented its already terrific coverage with Hidden Power Ice. And while many Garchomp were Yachtberry variants, it was still a terrific weapon, especially for other prominent Pokemon such as Salamence and Gliscor. Now you may be thinking of Blaziken's old conundrum. It couldn't run both Hidden Power Grass and Hidden Power Ice, thus making it difficult to deal with either waters or dragons. However, Infernape did not have this problem. Its access to the far superior Grass Knot let it absolutely plow through Swampert and Suicune, as well as the new Hippowdon. These four moves alongside the new Life Orb formed the classic mixed Infernape set. Thanks to its unique speed tier, it didn't even need to run maximum speed investment unless it really wanted to tie with other Infernape, which is a risky gambit, and thus it could pump a good amount of investment in both its attacking stats to ensure certain KOs, such as Blissey with close combat, which is another thing Blaziken could not truly do. It may seem strange to compare Infernape with a Pokemon from another generation, but it really is the best example to illustrate how much it improved on the template of a mixed attacker, since in the new generation, you couldn't just be good against defense, you had to be solid against offense too. While Infernape did have access to Swords Dance and the new Nasty Plot, it didn't use them very much. It was just too good at getting in and immediately slamming everything without the need for setup. Though it's worth mentioning that Infernape wasn't an automatic stall killer, but then again, few things truly are. Cresselia was often paired with Skarmbliss in a core so nasty that many more casual players would have a no Skarmbliss crest clause, and the most famous stall team of the Diamond and Pearl era, Obies, actually used Tentacruel, largely because it dealt with Infernape well. However, it was very often just one Pokemon holding these teams, whose remaining members were utterly terrified of Ape together, so while you would likely not be able to send Infernape in against a stall team and automatically win, with a little team support, there were few things scarier. And while not a stall killer, Choice Scarf Infernape also saw some use. It would outpace a lot of Pokemon that would normally destroy it on offense, such as Gengar, Deoxys Speed, and Choice Scarf Garchomp. It was also a fantastic revenge killer for for Dragon Dance Salamence, and it could keep momentum with U-turn, another tremendous move in its arsenal. Then Platinum came out, and Infernape began to see different use. The prominence of the Focus Sash Roserade lead led to sets that saw Infernape break the sash with Fake Out, and then threaten to outspeed and one-hit KO with a fire move, which would then let it set up Stealth Rock early in the game. Infernape would also scare out the common Lum Metagross that also rose in response to lead Roserade, and while it wouldn't outspeed lead Azelf, its Fake Out would still break the Focus Sash, so it could KO the elf as it set up Stealth Rock. Infernape quickly became one of the defining DPP leads, consistently starting its user off with a bang. It was so prominent that lead Empoleon used Choppleberry to weaken close combat instead of Focus Sash just for Infernape and its Fake Out. Now this Infernape variant did start dwindling later in the post-Dragon era, once Bulky Starmie became incredibly common, as it both walled Ape and kept Stealth Rocks off, except for some crafty players who abused Starmie's presence with things such as Choice Scarf Rotom appliances or Pursuit Tyranitar or Scizor, and potentially even U-turn on Ape. Once Fake Out became known, it became less necessary, since opponents that feared it had to respect it lest they immediately start off at a disadvantage. Lead Starmie was a different matter, as it was harder to deal with when it wasn't coming in. But for a time, there existed an alternate lead Ape set, Stealth Rock, Overheat, Endeavor, and Vacuum Wave, as it would survive Starmie at 1 HP, then finish it off with a Vacuum Wave, and a truly brave player could even opt to use Stealth Rock as Starmie switched. Now speaking of the Dragons era, let's go back to the chronological order we were going in. Latias dropped into overuse, and Latias is pretty much the best mixed Infernape counter possible. Thus, Infernape's usage dropped outside the lead slot, at least for a time. Eventually, the physically based mixed attacker rose up, and this new counterpart to the more specially oriented classic didn't mind Latias because it packed U-turn, which completely turned the tables on the Eon Dragon. Since it invested more in physical attack, it went from Fire Blast or Flamethrower as it stabs to Overheat, and as its last move, it either ran Stone Edge to deal with Gyarados, who's a popular check, while making sure Salamence didn't get off scot-free either, and having a real hard smack on Zapdos and Togekiss, or Mach Punch, which was incredibly useful for checking Swords Dance Lucario before it could land in extreme speed, finishing off weakened Choice Scarf Heatran, or preventing Choice Scarf Tyranitar, another rising check to Latias, from revenge killing it. Scarf T-Tar itself was actually a hugely useful Infernape partner, being able to remove checks such as Latias, Gengar, Starmie, and Choice Scarf Rotom from the game. Eventually, this style went one step further, and Infernape went full out physical with a Choice Band set. At first, it was somewhat scoffed at since part of what makes Infernape so dangerous is its coverage, but Life Orb was infamously one of Infernape's downfalls, since it allowed the opponent to try and beat it just by switching around its attacks, and this was especially compounded in Sandstorm, and Infernape was also U-turning in these conditions, especially with Stealth Rock up, and all these conditions are just not ideal. Thus, Infernape made its U-turn sting more and gained longevity, and while not being able to switch its attacks, its ability to scout more safely and have its user be able to form a game plan that would allow them to fully make use of whichever attack Infernape locked itself into outweighed this downside, and a smart player would be able to take advantage of its fully powered close combats that now really cleave through popular checks like Vaporeon and Suicune, while it gained a vicious Flare Blitz for its other stab moves, and its Mach Punches or Stone Edges also really appreciated the boost when trying to finish something off or break through a tough flying type wall, respectively. And continuing with our timeline, eventually sometime after the release of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Latias was banned and Salamence followed not long after. Thus, Stall was predicted to rise, and in an almost preemptive response, Infernape's Nasty Plot variant gained popularity as it was famously near impossible to deal with for those teams. With Stealth Rock up, even the new wall that had popped up due to the influx of powerful fighting types, which is defensive Rest Talk Gyarados, would fall to a Grass Knot, while Special Wall Blissey would be felled by a close combat, or a +2 Focus Blast, if it actually hit, which also had the benefit of melting the go-to ape check in the tier, the very popular Vaporeon. Swords Dance variants with Stone Edge or Thunder Punch were similarly effective, but eventually this died out because after the Latias ban, Starmie rose, and it stopped mixed and set up Infernape in its tracks. Even a Life Orb Grass Knot wouldn't defeat it, thanks to Starmie's relatively low weight. So while these sets continue to exist, it didn't take long for Infernape to go back to spamming Choice Banded U-turns, which made for a great Starmie lure, and was generally tough to deal with if Stealth Rock was up. It was especially fierce with further entry hazard support from the increasingly popular specially defensive Spikes Roserade, which got endlessly free setup against Infernape's longtime nemesis Vaporeon, as well as checking Starmie and also coming in easily against the Rotom appliances. And at the end of the generation and afterwards, Choice Band was Infernape's easiest to use set. It paired well with other fierce U-turners such as Choice Band Scizor, Choice Band Azelf, Stealth and Choice Scarf Flygon, making for relentless offensive teams that played off each other's weaknesses and in tandem with each other, which made for a synergistic wall-breaking machine. Not that Mixed Ape ever fell off the map, of course. It's still a terrifying threat, just not as simple to use, which speaks more to how incredibly easy U-turn is to pull off, how important Starmie is in the metagame, and how badly people dislike giving it free turns. However, physical walls such as Gliscor and the post-generation superstar Nidoqueen were in for a nasty surprise if they switched in expecting the easily spammed and easily resisted U-turn, and instead ate a vicious Fire Blast. Also, teams that expect to handle Choice Band Infernape via Protect from defensive Heatran and Jirachi do not appreciate when the Pokemon that takes one stab move switches in and Infernape pops the other stab move on it. This Protect spam can also be taken advantage of by the unorthodox slack-off Mixed Ape, and people have eschewed Life Orb on Infernape to prey on those who try to handle it by letting it wear itself down, not just Expert Belt, which also bluffs a choice item, but even Leftovers, which illustrates just how important this aspect is in relation to handling Infernape in DPP. The Choice Scarf variant of Infernape also had somewhat of a resurgence. It's able to handle late-game threats to most Infernape checks, such as Starmie, Gengar, Choice Scarf Rotom, Choice Scarf Heatran, and Choice Scarf Flygon, while being a nice emergency check to set up sweepers and quite a vicious late-game cleanup option. Overall, Infernape was one of the most defining Diamond and Pearl threats, always a top-tier contender to rip any team in the metagame apart, and famous for its stall crushing, but also a tremendous offense killer, and one of the best Pokemon introduced by the 4th generation. Now for Gen 4 VGC, Infernape actually had a role in VGC 2009 by virtue of Fake Out, a potentially amazing disruptive move, and of course its tremendous speed and stab combo, which gave it a great offensive presence, especially since it could use Heat Wave for spread damage. Omega Donut even used Endeavor alongside Focus Sash to bring opponents to 1 HP for easy pickings afterwards, and Feint to break Protect. Both of these moves synergized beautifully with Metagross's Explosion and gave Omega Donut a second place finish at the Nashville Regionals. Then in 2010, and again full disclosure, there's not a lot of information on Gen 4 VGC, but once again, Fake Out was very useful to mess with Kyogre's brutally dangerous Water Spout, and this involved Hitmontop and, you guessed it, Infernape. Danny Zollner even used Encore on Infernape to mess up Protect users en route to placing top 16 at Nationals in the Seniors Division, and Skarm used it to reach top 10 in Masters. But Infernape's biggest moment though was reaching second at Worlds in the hands of Yasuki Tochigi. Yup, the same guy who used Lugia. It was a strong Pokemon despite its frailty in a 2v2 environment, and it showed it with its placings, though few and far in between. Now on to the weather generation. Infernape of course did not like the new permanent drizzle, which not only weakened its fire moves, but also provided an incredibly hard counter in the form of Rain Dish Tentacruel. Latias and Latios dropping from Ubers also did not help it out. The addition of fellow base 108's Terrakion, who had one of the best stab combinations in Pokemon history, and Virizion, who could combat drizzle well, also meant Infernape was no longer as unique in its blazing fast niche. Bulky psychics such as Reuniclus and Mew also dealt it a tough hand. And then finally, it was completely and utterly outclassed by Speed Boost Blaziken. That is, until Speed Boost Blaziken was found to be so overtly powerful that it was banned. Afterwards though, Infernape did find some usage with its mix sets. There were ways to combat Drizzle, and its stab combination was as nice as ever, with Ferrothorn roaming around, having a strong Grass Knot for Jellicent and Slowbro, in addition to having a great speed tier, so it could Hidden Power Ice all the dragons, Landorus, and Gliscor that roamed free, while being able to Mach Punch the incredibly dangerous Excadrill, which was nice alongside its new Dream World ability, Iron Fist. And this ability was also useful in smashing through Jellicent with Thunder Punch. Now Infernape was no longer at the top of the threat list, but it was still decently viable, especially as Sandstall teams began to pop up, and it managed to slice its way through these teams pretty nicely. However, this role in the metagame disappeared in Black and White 2. The incredible Keldeo was introduced, and it also shared Infernape's speed tier, while being much more resilient as a whole, and able to contend with the metagame at large, as Keldeo abused Drizzle instead of fearing it. The introduction of Tornadus Therian also completely dominated Infernape, and while it was eventually banned, Infernape's usage stayed down for a reason. It just wasn't useful anymore. Magic Guard Alakazam, while being released in Black and White 1, truly found its footing as a top tier Pokemon in Black and White 2, and this didn't help matters much either. Thus, Infernape sadly fell out of favor in the latter half of the generation, and while one could do worse, it doesn't exactly have much potential for any sort of niche in the metagame. Weather's a big deal. Now as for VGC, in 2012 and 2013, despite the new existence of Speed Boost Blaziken, Infernape used its Fake Out and Stab combination once more, although it occasionally traded in its Focus Sash for Life Orb. Placements for 2012 include Bioski's runner-up at the Southern California Regionals, and for 2013, placements include Jordan Bradley's 3rd place at Australian Nationals, Matthias H's 3rd place at European Nationals in Milan, and I'm so sorry if I butcher your name, Zai Maninho's top 16 finish at the same event, though unfortunately Infernape's placings as a fighting type with Fake Out pale in comparison to Hitmontop's placings, so yeah, there's that. But it seemed decent in Gen 5 VGC. Now on to Gen 6. Unfortunately, Infernape didn't have much to do in this generation. Blaziken and its new Mega overshadowed it, and though they didn't exactly last long before being banned, Infernape did not step out of their shadow afterwards. What with all the Keldeos, Latioses, Thunderuses, and Garchomps, not to mention the new fairies like Azumarill, Togekiss, and Clefable. Now outside of junk sets like Mixed Gunk Shot that was never actually used effectively, its one real role arose as a point in Oraz, where 3 of the biggest threats were Mega Scizor, Bisharp, and Weavile. For the first time, it used Slack Off and assumed a defensive role that could adequately handle all 3. It could also help pivot around Mega Charizard Y in a pinch. Now, this didn't last for more than a couple months, if that, but it was interesting to see Infernape play a role that was the complete opposite of what it's known for. This lack of usage in OU meant Infernape dropped to underuse, and there it truly shone like it hadn't since DPP. It utterly mauled the tier. Nasty Plot found itself on all sorts of offensive teams, from more balanced approaches to those with Azuff leads, whose game plan was an all-out blitz, and it was tremendous at slicing through every type of team out there, smashing through even resists, such as Salamence. Chandelure walled this set, but it be dispatched by an Earthquake from the mixed variant, which was also solid for smacking Nidoqueen, Tentacruel, and Mega Ampharos. Ape could also go full physical with its Choice Band and Swords Dance variants, the former packing the always dangerous U-turn, and the latter being similar to Nasty Plot in its stall-breaking capabilities. Finally, Infernape could run a great Choice Scarf set that was so fast it could even outpace Stoutland and Kabutops in their respective speed boosting weathers, and in general cleaned up hard, especially with Hydreigon being the most common opposing Scarfer in underuse. However, Nasty Plot was generally Ape's most effective set that saw use on several of the generation's greatest underused teams. Infernape was one of the best Pokemon in Generation 6 underused, and truly one of the tier's defining Pokemon. And as for Gen 6 VGC, unfortunately, Infernape's 2014 and 2015 usage wasn't as high thanks to the ubiquitous powerful Talonflame, as well as the general power creep, but it still had a niche with its good speed and Fake Out to support hard hitters like Garchomp and various Megas. Its placements included Joshua Laurel's 7th place at Indonesia's first Premier Challenge in 2014, and in 2015, Juan Hao Lee's 6th place at Washington Regionals, and Alex C's 8th place at the Australian Nationals in the Junior Division. Jamie Boyt's 36th place at the UK Nationals, Daichi Kunabe at Japanese Nationals, and Jamie Boyt again with a 32nd place finish at Worlds. However, not much is really known about these Infernapes, and with these being the only placements we found, unfortunately, this probably indicates that Infernape just wasn't suited for Gen 6 VGC. Now finally, Sun and Moon. Again, the conditions are harsh, and Infernape never stood a chance in overuse. However, with the introduction of Z Crystals, it became even more of a brutal threat in underuse. And while it didn't appreciate the reintroduction of its nemesis Latias, Pursuit is ever present in this tier, seeing use on Crocodile, Scizor, Alolan Muck, and Mega Aerodactyl, so it was manageable. Plus, Infernape always had good old Choice Band sets. However, its bread and butter is the new and improved Nasty Plot set, which now eschewed Life Orb in favor of Phytinium Z. This allowed it to use a jacked up Focus Blast that couldn't miss and melted basically anything that wasn't immune. Even the mighty Blissey will fall after a Nasty Plot, as well as Alolan Muck and Naiho Ego. It doesn't even need a boost to destroy other common Pokemon such as Komodo and Swampert. Otherwise, its old standards remain useful for the same reasons they'd always been: Scarf, Mix, Swords Dance, and the aforementioned Choice Band. And as for VGC, in Gen 7, Infernape's usage was non-existent, with Pokemon such as Arcanine and Tapu Fini destroying it easily, and in 2018, Incineroar came into play, who's another Fake Out fire type, except this one has Knockoff, Actual Bulk, and Intimidate. And also, even though it clearly looks like a firefighting, it's a dark type, so yeah, whatever. Now, unless Incineroar gets sucked into a black hole, it seems Infernape's days in VGC are behind it, especially if someone else doesn't come up with a new use for it. And that's it. So how good was Infernape actually? Well, in its debut generation, it made its mark as a definitive Pokemon in the tier, possessing unmatched offensive utility. However, the following generations unfortunately knocked it down several pegs in overuse, though never to the extent of being truly bad. However, once it found more comfortable surroundings and underused, it proceeded to dominate in a DPP-esque fashion again. And in VGC, it was actually pretty useful, at least for Gen 4 and 5, in spite of its frailty, which is generally less favorable in doubles. That is, until the perfect Pokemon, Incineroar, who's also in Smash, came around. So yeah, overall, Infernape was pretty good. So now we have another powerful fire type starter that Ash adopted from a jerk trainer. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And next week is the late patron pick, since I kind of got my dates mixed up, so that's my bad. But in the comments, let me know what you think of competitive Infernape. And speaking of patrons, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.